Welcome back to the Gielinor Games Week 10 review, and you know what? Guys, I am in shambles right now. I can't believe Settled tried to bribe Hootie with real money on Gielinor Games. If it wasn't obvious, it was clearly a joke. I did not actually try to bribe a literal Jagex moderator in a 10-person Discord call on an entertainment game show. Let a man look desperate for a joke. Okay, so coming into this week, I won a very stressful banning against Bodhi, so not only am I coming into this week with a sabotage to use on a player of my choice, but also I'm coming in with a lot more confidence. But with that newfound confidence, I also realized and started getting a little paranoid. Everyone is going to want to put me into a banning. I need to do everything in my power to stay in the game, so I come up with a foolproof, airtight, mathematically sound plan to not go into the banning this week. And it worked perfectly, is what I would have said if it worked perfectly. We also get a massive reveal this week. No more tribunal. Only one person will win every challenge from here on out, and they're all going to be solo challenges from here. So that is a very big dynamic shift. What ended up happening this week was something straight out of the scriptwriter's room, because everything went wrong. Literally everything went the exact opposite way of how I expected this week. So the challenge this week was a Tombs of a Mascot tank test, essentially. Survive as long as possible. There's 2 groups for the challenge. You have to finish top 2 in your group to advance to the next round. So before we meet for the week, I enact my plan. I send out DMs. I send a message to Foe, and I'm like, hey man, you and Roydy, us 3, let's make a deal to get into the final 5 together. We truce up, don't put each other in, but once it hits final 5, it's fair game. How does that sound? And Foe accepts the deal, so I take him for his word, and I assume I'm good on that front. Sea Engineer, Framed, and Victim, I already have good relationships with. I have Sea Engineer put in a good word for me with Torvesta. He seems like a complete lone wolf right now, but you never know when he's going to win a challenge and have some power, so I cover my bases. And lastly, there's Hootie, and I have a sabotage this week, so naturally, I have to put it on Hootie. And Hootie says something when I sabotage him. He's like, I only have 50 KC in this raid, and I knew this was a lie. I looked him up. He had hundreds of TOA KC, and it was more recent than mine, so I figured he would be a great person to sabotage here. And not only that, he's the only person I haven't reached out to, so it works out perfectly for me. Mathematically, the odds I go into the banning now are slim to none. I just have to avoid a Hootie revenge win, but he's sabotaged, so the chances he wins are pretty low, right? And another thing, since I won the banning last week, I also get the power to make 2 groups or heats for the challenge, which is a huge benefit. It takes me a quick minute to do some research. I look up some people on the high scores. Some people here already have reputations for being great at BVM, so I decided, okay, I'm definitely taking the guy I just sabotaged in my group. Victim has barely done any TOA. He has 9 KC, and Torvesta has never done TOA. This gives me my absolute best odds. I don't even need to win the group. I just need top 2, and I intentionally put Foe and Roydy at the top of Group A, which gives them the power to layer the Kefri dung how they want, giving them a slight edge in the challenge. So I need to build some trust with them, because there's a great chance one of them is winning this challenge. They're both great at TOA, so I need to be in their good graces, because losing any challenge right now is basically a guaranteed banning for me otherwise. Having Group A go first is also good, because I get to observe some important stuff about the dynamics of the challenge here. So I've already taken some notes. I'm constructing a plan to enter my group with. So what I noticed about the challenge from watching Group A is that prayer is king here. If I can one-tick flick all the way through the challenge and conserve my prayer better than anyone else, I should have a top 2 finish, because redemptions are super easy to proc here. So the more super restore I save, the more likely I outlast. I don't need to do damage to the boss. Hootie has way less food than me already, and Torvesta will probably die to mechanics because he's literally never been inside the raid. So I go into this challenge already knowing what I want to do during it. But when I enter the Kefri room, immediately everything goes wrong. I can't outlast the other people if I don't have a square to myself, which all other competitors in Group A had. They had their own little bubbles, and it made the challenge simple, but Torvesta was so unpredictable that he ended up going into my square when he got the Kefri dung, and that just completely ruined everything. Like, my challenge was over in that moment. So we are now sharing a tiny little area of walkable terrain. I couldn't believe my plan was going the exact opposite direction so soon. This should have been the perfect group to be in, but in reality, having every player be completely predictable in this specific room, like in Kefri, is probably better. If this was any other room in TOA, I think this would have been the perfect group, but in these circumstances, I did not expect to be griefed so hard. Oh man, this was so brutal. I saw some people say that, no, you could have phased Kefri and spawned minions to kill Hootie, but within minutes, Torvesta and I literally don't even have a space to attack Kefri in. Even if we did have one, we would have to do 1800 damage, and that's just not gonna happen. That took Group A, I think 11 minutes to phase Kefri. Hootie was essentially golden once Torvesta trapped me. That is really bad news for me because I needed Hootie in particular to not make it into round 2, but it was looking like exactly that was going to happen. So he got a free ride to round 2, which means the sabotage essentially did nothing. The sabotage disappeared for round 2, by the way. He didn't have it in the Akka room. So it was only during Kefri, and it essentially didn't matter. So now I'm a little nervous. Round 2 is the Akka room. Hootie, Victim, Foe, and Roydy. I am rooting for anyone who's not Hootie at this point. And for all I know, if any of these guys were to win, they could still put me in the banning. It's entirely possible. It's not like I knew anything for certain, but the only thing I knew for certain is that if Hootie won, I was 100% going in, whereas everyone else would at least have to deliberate a bit. It's not certain that they would put me in. And props to Hootie here because he did super well. He did genuinely play very, very well, and despite not having the sabotage on, he technically did have a different sabotage on. He had Australian ping here, so I totally, I respect the fact that he did so well here. He ran out of food before Foe and Roydy and still managed to clutch it out despite me absolutely not wanting him to win here. It's complete poetic justice that my foolproof plan completely evaporates in front of me. I planned it all out, and the one scenario I couldn't allow to happen happened, which means I already know what's gonna happen. And it was so sick that it came down to this, like this final game tick where Roydy and Foe both missed their redemption flick, and Hootie just barely manages to scrape it by. This was such an intense challenge to watch. I absolutely loved watching this, even though I was sitting there like a little sad that I'm not in it, but it was still very intense to watch from a viewer perspective. So I already know what's going to happen at this point. I am going into a banning. So yes, me pretending that I'm going to ask for Hootie's PayPal was a joke. I knew I was going in at this point. There was literally no other choice for Hootie, and that was blatantly obvious. So anyway, I'm selected for the banning. I have to choose my opponent, and this is where an extremely hard choice pops up. I really wasn't expecting to be put in the banning this week. I hadn't thought about who I would put in if it came down to it. But I felt like this was an inflection point where it was no longer just about staying in the game. There's only 8 people, me included, so 7 other people. So I started to think, okay, I could take Sea Engineer into this banning. I have a really good shot at beating him, but that frees up a spot for a bigger threat to make it into a final. And I feel like if I don't get Victim out, then no one is going to, because I'm going to be the guy that people want to put in the banning. So when am I ever going to get a chance to take Victim out of the game? And I felt like we had similar skill sets. So of the bigger threats remaining, I felt most confident against him in a head-to-head banning. I beat him in a PvP 1v1 in the Season 3 final. I know he's out of practice with PVM, and on the game knowledge side, I thought we match up pretty well. So I thought about all that, and I felt like I had a pretty good chance of winning. And the banning today was Spellbook Swap. Victim and I both start with nothing but 4 staminas in our inventory, and we have to find a way to swap to every single spellbook in the game and cast a spell on each of them. The first person to do that wins. So some additional rules are once you swap to a spellbook, you have to drop every item in your inventory that's not a stamina potion, so you basically have to find ways to make money in close proximity of each spellbook. I do have some never before seen footage and behind the scenes on this banning because everything that could go wrong did go wrong. So let's start with some context. Victim and I had 5 minutes to prepare a plan for this banning. Soup wanted to start pretty quickly. We mute up, we write our plans. It's a hard banning to plan literally every step for in that amount of time. Soup definitely wanted to throw in some chaos and just have it be more like thinking on your feet for at least more than half the banning. So we get started, and literally within 15 seconds of the banning starting, this happens. Hello? I'm lagging so bad. Hello?
No,
Hello?
DC'd.
I'm DC'd?
Okay.
Can we hop?
What
Wait,
the? This?
yeah.
Oh, it's the entire world. Okay.
Oh, wait. Oh, the world
Yeah,
just
the
went
whole
down. That's
world
so
just went
funny.
down.
Oh,
my
did it?
God.
Okay,
Okay,
let's.
I was
What
like,
is that timing, dude?
What the fuck is this
That's
game, bro?
crazy.
Okay, just come back to Ferox. We'll just restart the run.
This really threw a wrench in the plan because I had already used a home teleport and I claimed my tutor runes, both of which have a cooldown, and Victim already used a minigame teleport, which also has a cooldown. So Soup essentially had to splice this part of the run because of this unforeseen world outage out of literally nowhere, and unfortunately stuff like this happens, you know? Mistakes go wrong when you're trying to do things live. Sometimes you have to fix stuff in post, and I think Soup did a great job. Anyway, let's get on to the next crazy part of this. So this is after we had disconnected. We were trying to get back to Ferox Enclave so we could restart immediately. and this happens.
Swap your spellbook, and then you can start the process of collecting stuff to cast a spell.
Oh, so you have to get to the altar to even begin taking anything.
Yes, you have to. Yeah,
Holy shit, my whole plan is fucked.
That's why I just asked that, because mine is too. It's just bricked.
I know that you're supposed to drop things once you cast a spell, but what I didn't know is
you can't gather new things until the new location.
Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, I wrote it in the thing. I'm sorry.
I know we're all flustered as hell right now. So
freaking out, bro.
So we're about to restart the challenge, but we just tossed in a new rule that neither of us planned for. We had like 2 minutes to adjust to this new rule, just in the time that it took us to get back to our places from where we disconnected. And finally, the challenge begins. It's chaos. So my first thought was to go to the Lumpy Tutors to grab the Aaron Mind Runes, because they don't require any money at all. Part of my 5-minute prep was getting any Aaron Mind Runes out of my bank so it would allow me to claim these, which makes this an instant time save. I don't need to hunt for a rune shop. And naturally, the next step seemed like the Ancient Spellbook. I was able to use the ferry to save me a ton of time. I think it's easily like a 2-minute time save from running through the desert to get to the pyramid. I changed to Ancients, pickpocket Alcarid Warriors, bought the runes for Smoke Rush, and this is where I had to adapt a lot because the rest of the run I didn't have planned out, basically. I used a Barbarian Assault minigame teleport to get close to Relica. Looking back on it, I do think Blast Furnace was closer due to the lack of agility obstacles. I switched to Lunars on Lunar Isle, and here comes a bit of niche Ultimate Iron Man knowledge that helped me win this banning, and that's Agnar. A lot of people were shocked at how I could know this NPC. Well, I, for one, have died at Vorkath on my Ultimate Iron Man and only had like 90, I think it was like 97, 98k in my death coffer, so I couldn't fully reclaim my gear. You need 100k. And that is how you find out many years ago that there are NPCs to pickpocket in Relica. I now know that there's tons of NPCs to pickpocket around Relica, but I've only ever known Agnar because he's the closest to the Vorkath death coffer. Saw some people say I just looked this up on the wiki before the challenge. What would I even Google to find this? And if I could, then why didn't Victim do it? Anyway, on to the final spellbook. I used my only fairy ring to get to Arceus, switch my spellbook, and in my head, I was actually planning to go for the guards next to the Korend Castle teleport. There's a bunch of guards like all around the perimeter of the castle, so where those 2 guards are south of the bank, that's very close to where I was going to go originally. And then I make it to the rune shop, I'm ready to cast my spell, and I don't have Kingdom Divided completed on this account. So to give you some insight here, all my accounts in the game are Iron Men or Ultimate Iron Man, or were at the time. I didn't have an account to compete in the Gielinor games with, so the account I'm using here isn't mine. A bunch of contestants get loaned an account to participate because a lot of people are Iron Man content creators who literally have no other option. They have no account to use. So I had no idea the quest wasn't completed on this account. I'm freaking out, but I just stop and think for a second, and I'm like, oh, there's a lower tier rune shop next door, and I go grab some runes over there. I cast like a low-level grasp spell, and I win the banning. At the time, I wasn't even aware that Victim used a home teleport as one of his spells. I definitely didn't know I could do that, and I guess my home teleport should have counted as my regular spellbook spell, but ultimately, it didn't matter, and Victim definitely didn't do it maliciously. He did ask Soup, and Soup gave him the green light, so maybe there was some sort of misunderstanding, miscommunication there, but ultimately it doesn't change the results of the banning. The editing made it look pretty damn close, but I was, I believe, about 7 minutes ahead when I finished my 4th spellbook. Even during the whole Kingdom Divided debacle I was having, Victim was unmuted and talking about how far he was from finishing, and it's basically like GG anyway. And I will say, because I really respect Victim as a player, I said this exact thing in my confessional in the episode, he's so good for how little he plays. And Victim would often come into the calls every week, every challenge, and he would say something about like being washed or not having played in a while, right? And I'm sure it was part of his strategy to get far in the game, to look weaker, right? And I think it did work pretty well. And on most challenges, it didn't really show. Like, you can't really tell that the guy hasn't been playing in most challenges. He's so good at adapting and learning things on the fly, but I think this banning showed that there was some truth to his claims that he's out of the loop. This challenge had a lot of things working against Victim purely because he didn't actually play the game that much. He didn't use the Relica agility shortcut, the one from Rock Crabs to inside Relica. He didn't know about the boat to get to Temporos. He ends up running through the desert instead. That's a 2-minute time loss. So the guy's being truthful when he says he didn't play the game all that much this season, and he made it really far despite that, with a massive disadvantage by being last season's winner. He immediately had a target on him, and this season, him not playing the game a lot, didn't have a chance to show very much. Like, you couldn't really tell, but I just think this particular banning exploited his exact weakness unintentionally and you could actually tell in this banning that he hasn't been playing that much. Say what you will about him not playing the game, but the guy won the final last season without playing the game very much. He's just very good under pressure. He can adapt to a situation very well, so he is a massive threat. I get the amulet of choice for winning the banning. I don't think it's really much of a choice anymore. It's more like an amulet of sabotage now. Partial immunity doesn't really help me. 200 mil isn't really worth it. I guess you could argue for it, but when a sabotage is much more impactful, the less people there are in the game, you kind of have to pick that. So sabotage, I'm taking that, and I hope it gives me an edge next week, and I'll see you guys in week 11.